Very good afternoon, friends. I think since morning, all the speakers, with due respect, they have ensured that they scare us a bit, and also they have highlighted many threats which are there. They also talk about the uncertainty which is there because of the technology. So to ensure that we end the conference on a positive note, I will be speaking about not the threats, but the opportunities which value-added tax is going to bring to all of you. Also, we are not going to talk about the uncertainty, and we are going to talk about the certainty. Why? Because of, I think there is one important saying wherein people say that in life, only death and taxes are certain. And I am going to talk about tax. So to move ahead with the topic, I think on the first slide which is there, the point is that why tax? Because whenever we talk about value-added tax, I think it is a kind of a tax reform, which is one of the most thought-provoking reform. Because the time you talk about tax, you will say, why? Why are you bringing tax? I think the reason for that is quite obvious, that the government across GCC, to ensure that they diversify their to ensure they diversify their revenues and various streams they should have, they are trying to bring value-added tax. Now, when you look at the VAT like a reform, as all of you are aware, that right now out of 195 countries, already more than 162 countries have brought value-added tax. So it is just a matter of around 32 countries or 33 countries who are yet to bring value-added tax. Now, if you look at in that context, most of the large economies, they already have VAT. So it is only one of the biggest economy which is yet to bring VAT is US, and another one is North Korea. I think that is the only topic wherein US and North Korea are on the same page as compared to all other topics. Now, when you look at VAT, as I mentioned, that VAT, why the government wants to bring? Because they want certainty in their tax revenue. Now, why value-added tax kind of a reform brings certainty for government? The reason are twofold. One, because VAT is applicable on all the consumptions, all the goods and all the services which you are going to buy. So whatever you are going to consume in 2019, because the likely date of introduction of VAT would be 1st of January 2019, whatever you are going to consume, that is going to attract value-added tax. And that is the reason we are trying to say that all the consumption in this country will be subject to VAT. Over a period of time, you would have observed that typically, while your income in a particular year or over the period of a year might fluctuate, that in one particular year, your company might make profit, in another year it might make losses. But as far as the expenses are concerned, the company will continue to incur the bare minimum expenses which they have to incur. And that what brings the certainty for the government, because your expenditures generally don't go down, whereas your income can fluctuate. Now, as I mentioned that we are going to talk about the kind of opportunities which VAT brings. We discussed since morning about the artificial intelligence, blockchain, robotics, machine learning and all the topics. Are we also focusing on VAT? Because as a banking sector, one of the next biggest opportunity for us is value-added tax. Why? Because VAT is such a kind of a transformative legal requirement that each and every business organization in this country is going to get impacted because of VAT. All of your customers, because your customers would be in the two categories. One, they would be either in the business or they would be consumers. So all your B2B customers as well as B2C customers, both of them are going to get impacted because of VAT. And as bankers, are we doing our bit to ensure that they are geared up for VAT? Are we doing our bit to ensure that we also transfer some knowledge to them to ensure that they are gearing up for VAT? Because in other part of the world, if you look at it, in other part of the world, when value-added tax was brought, most of the bankers actually took this as a big opportunity to go from one location, means from one stage to another stage. So take example of India. Most of the bankers ensured that during the transition to GST, they conducted maximum number of customer engagements through various seminars, webinars, correct? And I think that is one of the opportunity which banking sector has today. If you want more customers, if you want better customers, if you want customers who are expected to be tax compliant, then VAT could be the next area for you for next 8 months. Even forget the matter about increasing the number of customers. Even to retain your existing customers, you will have to ensure that you are engaging with your customers for value-added tax. Why? Because if you don't engage with your customers for value-added tax or one of a reform which is very close to their heart, then naturally some other competitor of yours will ensure that your customer is taken away by him, because his bank will offer some seminars, webinars, some customer engagement on VAT. That another bank, as compared to your bank, might offer some technology solutions for VAT. Have you factored in any technology solution for value-added tax? Because every business in this country is required to file online returns after value-added tax is introduced. Are we doing anything about that? What about the fact that after VAT is introduced, all the VAT payments will be required to be carried through the bank's channel. Now, unless and until your bank is enrolled with the government, can you ensure that the customer, that is the business customer which is there with you, will continue with you as a bank? Because if your bank can't provide him a payment gateway, he will go back to the next bank, because he has to make payment to the government about VAT. And that is where I think you have to be very careful. And that's what I am trying to say, that VAT is going to bring you an opportunity. Now, when we talk about VAT, most of the time the question or the thought process which comes to our mind is, VAT is all about taxes. But practically, is it only about tax, or it's going to be much beyond tax? Because when you look at VAT kind of a tax reform, we always say it is not about a tax reform, but rather VAT is a business reform. Why it's a business reform? Because most of the businesses who are currently not paying any corporate taxes, who are not registered with the government, or who are actually not maintaining their records, everybody has to maintain record. Most of them have to get registered, and most of them are required to pay taxes as well as file VAT return. So they become compliant, which is never the case in the earlier regime. Now the question is, why they are going to pay the VAT? Because corporate tax they don't pay, there might be few people. The reason is, VAT is an indirect tax. They don't have to pay it from their own pocket. What they are supposed to do? Collect from the government, collect from the customer and pay to the government. That's where for the businesses, there is a least possible thought to evade VAT. Whereas in corporate taxes, because you are supposed to pay it from your own pocket, most of the time people avoid to pay corporate taxes, but that doesn't happen with indirect taxes. When you look at the impact of VAT, naturally it is not an impact only on the finance function of the company, not only on the accounts function of the company, but the impact of VAT goes much beyond that. It's on the sales and marketing function of the company. Have you observed that whenever VAT is introduced, generally before introduction of VAT, for the next 2 to 3 months, for example in UAE, VAT was introduced on 1st of January 2018. From October to December, there was a surge in sales. There was a huge demand for various products, and most of the company or trader, they were not able to meet those demands. So they lost few customers. Why? Because they are not able to factor in that demand. So naturally, because before any country introduces VAT, most of the sellers try to find customers by giving some discount, because they say that buy now, you don't have to pay VAT, because if you buy in January 2018 or January 2019, you are going to pay VAT. So effectively it is a 5% discount they are going to offer, and that's where that you have to factor in all your sales and marketing activities also. Most of the schemes which you have, like for example, if you give something free as buy one get one free, currently that scheme is as good as that you buy one and you get one free. But in VAT, after VAT is introduced, these kind of schemes will undergo change. They can't have one buy one get one scheme, because it has VAT implication. Because the time you give any product free of cost to your customer, you are supposed to reverse the input tax credit, or you are supposed to pay VAT on that transaction. And that's why your sales marketing activity is going to get impacted. Another important area from VAT perspective is procurement. Now, when you look at procurement side, you'll realize that from procurement, it is not about you as a company, it's about all your vendors. It's about the 200, 300 vendors which you are having as a bank, or 200, 300 vendors of your customers. Now, unless and until your vendors are giving you appropriate VAT invoices after 1st of January 2019, you will not be in a position to claim input tax credit. And that's where, if you don't focus on VAT from procurement perspective, you are going to lose money. So VAT is another area wherein if you don't focus, you will lose some money. Another aspect, when you look at change management, it is not only about the finance and tax people who are supposed to be VAT savvy. Everybody in the company, right from the CEO to the CTO, because you have to carry out changes in ERP as well. Right from the legal officer, he has to carry out changes in his legal contract for VAT. So everybody should be aware about GST or should be aware about VAT. And that's where change management becomes very critical in value-added tax. Even when you look at the IT technology perspective, as I mentioned, your ERP has to gear up for VAT. Unless and until your ERP is geared up for VAT, you cannot generate VAT invoices. Now, as a banker, as of now, how many of you are issuing invoices to your customer? As a banker, what we do generally? We debit the charges to our customer in his bank account directly, correct? Do we issue any invoice to the customer? Mostly no. But in value-added tax regime, you are supposed to issue a VAT invoice to your customer. Unless and until you issue an invoice, to your customer, the customer would not be in a position to claim credit. Also, it's a mandatory requirement under VAT law for you to issue tax invoices. And few of the VAT regime levy penalty as high as 500 riyals per invoice. So if you don't issue 10 invoices, you are going to pay penalty of 500 riyals into 10. And that's where it could be a matter of concern for you that you have to ensure appropriate IT, or from IT perspective, you are appropriately geared up. From banking perspective, I would like to share that yes, there are quite a few challenges which are likely to crop up. Thank you. One is basically on what you are going to pay tax, because as bankers, typically your income is the interest income, correct? Now, are you going to pay any VAT on interest income? Generally, the answer is no, because even when you look at UAE or Saudi, no VAT is payable on interest. But what about all other fees which you are charging? Generally, all the fees would attract VAT, and that is where you have to factor in the impact of VAT on all your fees. Also, what about the credit apportionment, or the apportionment of the income which you are generating right now, but which is apportioned over a period of time? Because as per IFRS, you might have some income which is generated in 2018, but you are going to say that I am going to apportion it over a period of the tenure of the loan. The question would be whether you are supposed to pay VAT on that income or not, and that is where determining all these answers would become very critical for you. Another aspect about VAT is that, as I mentioned, it's not going to only impact you as a company, it is going to impact your borrowers as well. Now, your borrower has given you a project, he has given you details about the likely revenue which he is going to generate in 2018, 2019, 2020. He has given you projections, correct? And based on that, you have sanctioned in loan. Now, have you factored in these projections the impact of VAT? Are you factoring the impact of VAT that his business, or he is going to get a lower sales as compared to last year because of VAT, or his sales might increase because of VAT? Are you factoring in impact of VAT on his business? If you are not, then you are missing a vital link, because VAT is going to determine fate of your borrowers also. And if he is not able to perform in the VAT regime, certainly your assets or the loans which are given, they also could turn to be NPAs. And that's where it could be a cause of concern for all of you. When we look at VAT, most of the time people say that we should prepare for VAT when VAT is about to be introduced, correct? But we believe that VAT is not a kind of a preparing for a 100-meter race. It's about preparing for a marathon. And to prepare for marathon, you have to start early. And in VAT regime, please note that it is not only you who is preparing for VAT regime. All your competitors are also preparing at the same time. And you will agree that few of the people or few of the companies in this country are going to gain more in the VAT regime as compared to others. Few of the transition to VAT would be smooth, whereas for other companies the transition may not be as smooth, correct? So if you want to ensure that you are in that winning category, you have to start fairly early. And I can share with you that most of our client, and also you would have heard also most of your competitor may already have initiated value added tax implementation, and you should also do it at the earliest. So what is about VAT? So when we talk about VAT, so sir, can you change the slide? Yes, so I'll just cover the next slide. So I think the most important question about VAT which is there in all of your mind would be this question which is appearing on the screen, or I think it is not appearing only. That is whether VAT would be postponed, correct? Now all of us believe that even in 2019 we won't see VAT, or rather we don't want to see VAT, correct? But will that be the reality? The likeliness of introduction of VAT has now increased altogether at a different level. In 2017, the discussion was that VAT would be introduced in 2018, but it was not introduced. So what it means, was it the fact that it was postponed indefinitely? Certainly not. Rather, it was a strategic move on the government's part. That it was a strategic move on the Oman government part, that Oman government wanted that we should not hurry for introduction of VAT. What as a government we should do, and they have done, that they said let us postpone VAT, and by doing that they have achieved two objectives. One, they have given more time for the local businesses to prepare for VAT, and what is that more time? It is approximately 12 months, because the likely date is 1st of January 2019. And second, the Oman government will be benefited from the experience of introduction of VAT in UAE as well as Saudi. So these two twin objectives the government achieved, and that's why we think that it is right on the part of the government that they postpone VAT, and that advantage now lies with you. If you prepare right now, certainly you will reap the benefit. If you not, certainly we are going to lose the benefit. So what should we do? What should be the step plan? I think we should start with the basic things. Like say, whenever there is a reform, whenever there is a VAT kind of a reform, we have to ensure that we start or we do something in-house first. And what can be that activity? One, we should at least have a team in our company who is tracking value-added tax reform. So there should be one person from finance, there should be one person from procurement, there should be one guy from sales marketing, there should be one guy from legal, there should be another guy from contract, tenders. So from each and every team we should borrow 1 to 2 guys and we should form a VAT team, that is one. Second, we should ensure that we conduct appropriate VAT sensitization training for all these team members first. Third could be that we should try to carry out, with the help of consultant, a VAT impact analysis. Because first we have to understand how VAT is going to impact our business organization from 3 perspectives. One, whether the cost of operation for the company will go up. Second, whether the working capital requirement for the company will go up. And third, what would be all other types of impact, what would be the impact on contract, what would be the impact on HR policies, what would be the impact on the CTCs of the employees. Because please note that VAT is also going to impact the salaries. Because tomorrow, next year, when VAT would be introduced, the cost of living will go up. So won't your employee come back to you and ask for raise? So have you factored that aspect in your next year budget? If not, then certainly that could be a cause of concern. Because if you are already working on a very thin margin, correct, next year, if the cost goes up, certainly that will eat into your margin. So you have to be very careful. And if you are working with a company, then you know one of the reasons to ask for a rise or raise in your salary now, correct? Now VAT, I think, is a kind of a climate change, rather it's a business climate change. Now either we gear up for it, and if we don't gear up for it, certainly there would be a penal consequences. So you have to be very much careful about that. It is always said that soldiers who prepare during the peace time, they bloodless during the war. So I think the ball is now in our court to ensure that we start preparation at the earlier for VAT implementation. So with this, I am through with our session on VAT. If there are any questions, we can take those questions now.
If I may say. So actually for us coming from Europe, we are very familiar with taxation and value-added taxes.
Correct.
And the question is always what you're going to get in return from the state, because VAT is not there for its own sake, right? It's nice to prepare ourselves, it's nice to understand the implication of the business.
Correct.
But the citizens in the country or the expats in the country, what they can expect in return from the state, because at the end of the day, they are increasing their income, right? And then in Europe and other parts of the world, we get something back, like a nice social coverage, for example, free education, things like that. So
correct.
What are the plans here in Oman related to that part of taxation?
Yes, certainly very good question. I think we have to see it from the perspective that whenever it comes to taxation, I will just draw an anecdote. So typically the sun does take moisture from the earth, but through rain it gives it back in multifold. So similarly, the government will also take 5% from the citizens, but through the basic infrastructure development, and also because Oman is growing, correct? So because we are growing, naturally there is a huge infrastructure need in the country. And that's where I think most of the funds could be used. So right now I don't have an answer from government perspective, but I think that is where the funds are going to be used. So better money would mean better infrastructure investment for the government. Yes, and maybe my colleague can throw some light. Yeah, please, sir. Yes.
I'll give a citizen view, and I think
please.
The way I look at it, it's for over 45 years now. We have been getting everything for free. In the challenging times, it's time for citizens, in fact, to give it back. It's the reverse here. It's not in a situation in more developed economies where taxation was as certain as death.
Yes.
This was not the case in this country, and I think that should be the mindset that we look at it in a challenging time. We should.
True.
If it becomes a 10 or 15, I would probably have a different answer to this.
Very true, very true. Well,
I have a question, because I noticed there's one difference between taxation, VAT taxation in my country and planned taxation in Oman, because in my country there is no VAT on financial services, and here from your prediction I understood that there will be.
No, it won't be. So there are
so what else will be exempted out of the VAT?
Okay, so I will share with you. See, generally across the world, when it comes to banking sector, none of the government want to tax interest component, because there is always a fight whether interest is time value of money or is it a consideration for a service. And if it is both, what is the proportion? So generally none of the countries have taxed the interest portion, and neither GCC as well as Oman is going to tax the interest portion. What the government is going to tax would be the service fee. So any loan processing fee you are going to charge, any DD charges, check bounce charges which you are going to levy on your customer, all those charges are expected to attract VAT. Now apart from interest, what we may not attract VAT? So basically the healthcare sector may not attract VAT, because in UAE also the healthcare is not liable to VAT. then you might also see some basic food item being kept outside the ambit of VAT, correct? The local transport, life insurance could be another sector, supply of bare land could be another area. So these are the likely goods or services which may remain outside the ambit of VAT, including education. But the finite list is not yet out, and I think the government will give out that list in the month of October or November, the time when VAT is likely to be introduced. Yes, any more questions? So friends, I always conclude my session with a note that generally when a person delivers a lecture, you should thank him, but I personally believe that if the topic is as complicated as tax, you should thank the audience for their patient hearing. So thank you all, thanks. You're a wonderful audience.